isolated and sharp troughs. You see all these isolated and sharp troughs. I've marked them with very skew sort of V's. They tend to have isolated and sharp troughs, and they tend to have clustered and rounded peaks. I've indicated there's a very sort of long-term clustered and rounded peaks. You could pick several of these as the peaks. Stock indices and stocks generally tend to have clustered and rounded peaks and sharp isolated troughs. That's a tendency. On the other hand, this is a chart of a commodity. That was the central chart, a commodity chart. Let's have a look at how the troughs and the peaks of a commodity behave. A commodity tends to have sharp isolated peaks. As you can see, I've marked them with inverted V's. And they tend to have rounded and clustered peaks, troughs, I beg your pardon. Clustered and rounded troughs and sharp and isolated peaks. Okay, let's have a look at the final chart. This is a forex pair. So, of course, I'm going to point out where the forex pair has sharp peaks or sharp troughs. Which do you think it is? Well, in fact, a forex pair tends to have a mixture of the two. It tends to have as many sharp isolated peaks as it does have sharp isolated troughs. And it tends to have as many clustered rounded peaks as it does have clustered rounded troughs. Right. So, what does all this mean? Why am I pointing out isolated peaks, isolated troughs? What this all means is that financial markets have character. Just as if a friend of yours, if you answer the phone and a friend of yours is on the other end of the line, you can generally recognize that friend because of the character of their voice, be it the pitch, the rhythm they speak with, the words they use, the timbre of their voice. You can recognize the character of a friend's voice. Similarly, you can recognize the character of a financial market. Okay? Now, what defines that character? I've spoken about isolated pointed troughs and isolated and rounded clustered peaks. Is that what I mean by character? No, that's one of the things. Just as your friends, the timbre of their voice is one of the things by which you recognize their voice. Isolated troughs and rounded peaks are one of the characters of particular financial markets. It's one of the ways in which you can distinguish stock indices or stocks and shares from forex pairs and from commodities. And it's one of the reasons why trading those things is a very different endeavor. So what, in fact, defines character? Well, what defines character is, in fact, the shapes of the cycles which make up the price movement. Okay? The shapes of the cycles. That is what defines the character of the financial markets. And I know this because I have analyzed hundreds of financial markets, and the shapes of the cycles in different markets are different. Okay? So, what is sentient trading methodology all about? It's about performing a phasing analysis based on Hurst's theory. Okay, it's Hurst's cyclic theory. You analyze the markets according to Hurst's cyclic theory. Then you perform trading according to Hurst's trading methodology, but you specifically trade a market because you understand the shapes of the cycles that are found within that market. Okay, so let's have a look. What is a shape of a cycle, you might ask? And so here I am pulling up the old sine wave curve again. Whenever anybody talks about cycles, they pull up sine wave curves. There's the sine wave curve. You're probably all rolling your eyes and looking at the ceiling. Because whenever I speak about cycles, I pull out my old sine wave curve and I show it to you and I say, there's a cycle. Sine wave curves are what I use always to speak about cycles, and it's what most people use when they speak about cycles. Why? Because a sine wave curve is cyclical. Imagine that the blue line was in fact the cycle, and the blue line moves up to a peak, then it moves down to a trough, and it does so in a cyclical manner. In other words, it moves up and then down, then up and then down, with a regular sort of a nature and in a cyclical manner. Of course, the wavelength of a cycle is the distance between two troughs or two peaks, or in fact any 2 points that are in the same phase. In other words, the same distance from a trough or from a peak. That's the phase of a particular cycle. That's why we speak about phasing analysis, of course. So that is a sine wave curve. Am I saying, in fact, to be exact, that is 2 sine wave curves? Okay. So am I saying that a cycle is shaped like a sine wave curve? Is this what a cycle looks like? In fact, although I always use sine wave curves to talk about what cycles look like, in fact, the sort of big surprise is that I don't believe a cycle looks like that. No. I think that is misleading. It is completely wrong. And I'm going to explain to you why. And to understand why, we need to go back to Hurst's cyclic theory, and we need to understand some of the basic principles of Hurst's cyclic theory. So let's do that. What are the basic concepts underlying Hurst's cyclic theory? Of course, I could mention each of the 8 principles that underlie her cyclic theory, but I'm not going to do that. Let's concentrate just on the basic concepts. Now, the first basic concept in her cyclic theory is that the price movement of financial markets is influenced by multiple cycles, not just 1 or 2 cycles, but by multiple cycles. How many cycles? In fact, an infinite number of cycles. Now, that's pretty bad news for people who want to analyze markets according to her cyclic theory, because it is impossible to understand an infinite number of things. If I tell you that the price movement of markets is influenced by an infinite number of cycles, then you're going to want to add up that infinite number of cycles so that you can see the influence of all of them. And of course, you cannot add up, you cannot sum an infinite number. So that's bad news. But the good news is that, in fact, we don't need to know all of them. We only need to know as many as we possibly can, and Hurst recommended a maximum of 11. Using Sentient Trader, if you're going intraday, you can know all the cycles from 3 minutes up to 18 years, which is a whole lot of cycles. So that's a lot of cycles. But the first basic concept about her cyclic theory that you need to understand is that price movement of financial markets are influenced by multiple cycles. What is the next thing that we need to understand? The next thing we need to understand is that the wavelengths of those multiple cycles are harmonically related. Okay, they're not just an arbitrary collection of cycles. If you say to me that you know for a fact that there is a 20-day cycle in the cyclic model that is influencing price movement of a particular financial market, then if I say to you, okay, there is a 20-day cycle, is there a 24.5-day cycle? The answer to that is no, because 24.5 days is not harmonically related to 20 days. By harmonically related, Hurst in fact said they must be harmonically related by a factor of either 2 or 3, which is very limiting. So if you know there's a 20-day cycle in the cyclic model, then you know that there will probably be a 40-day cycle which has a 2-to-1 harmonic ratio. In other words, the 40-day cycle has a wavelength which is 2 times as long as the 20-day cycle. That's what harmonic ratio means. Harmonic ratio is the ratio between the wavelengths of the cycles. All right, so we have multiple cycles which are related harmonically. So they're not an arbitrary collection of cycles. They're all related harmonically. So all the wavelengths of the cycles in the cyclic model that we use to analyze the market are related by an integer of 2 to 1 or 3 to 1. Okay. What is the next basic concept in her cyclic theory? The next basic concept is that the troughs of the cycles are synchronized. We have synchronized troughs. In fact, as I'm going to explain a little later, different markets, I believe, have synchronized peaks. But let me not confuse the issue for now. Hurst stated that the troughs of the cycles were synchronized. Okay, that's what you need to hold on to for now. Okay, the next really important concept is the concept of underlying trend. What is underlying trend? Underlying trend is the contribution of all the cycles in your cyclic model that are longer than your trading cycle or the cycle that you're considering. So it is the combined influence of all the cycles longer, simple as that, than the cycle that you are considering. So here's a cyclic model. If you're a Sentient Trader user, you'll recognize this. This is what happens if you print out your cyclic model. You get something like this. And the grayed out cycle, the 40-day cycle. Well, first of all, you'll notice that all of these cycles are related by harmonic ratios. You've got a 5-day cycle, double the wavelength, 2-to-1 harmonic ratio is 10 days, double the wavelength, 2-to-1 harmonic ratio is 20 days, and so on, 2-to-1 harmonic ratios all the way up until we get to the 18-month cycle. Okay, so those are all 2-to-1 harmonic ratios. What is underlying trend? Underlying trend is the contribution of all the cycles longer than the cycle that we are trading or considering. So the cycle that we are considering is the 40-day cycle. Let's look at all the cycles longer. Well, that's 80-day, 20-week, 40-week, and 18-month, and then what's called sigma L. Let's not sweat the details. Let's not bother about all those things. But let's say that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cycles longer than our trading cycle. And the blue arrow means that that cycle is due for a turn-up, which means that it will soon be influencing price to move up. So if we want to calculate the underlying trend, we simply add up all the upward pointing and subtract all the downward pointing arrows, and we end up with +1 for this blue arrow, which is pointing up, -1 for that red arrow, minus another one for that red arrow, minus another one for that red arrow, +1 for that green arrow, and we end up with a total of -1, which is referred to as a negative underlying trend. That is an underlying trend. It's the fourth very important thing you need to know about Hurst's cyclic theory. All right. Finally, you need to be aware that cycles exist in continuous time according to Hurst's cyclic theory. In other words, they play out over 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. They have nothing to do with our trading days. It's not Monday to Friday. It's not the cycles don't stop moving when we take summer holidays, or even if the stock market closes down because of a huge national crisis, perhaps. The cycles keep moving. Cycles don't just move because we are sitting around trading. Okay, they exist in continuous time. Those are the basic concepts that one needs to understand about Hurst's cyclic theory. What does that have to do with the shape of a cycle? All of that started when I said, "Is this what a cycle looks like?" Okay, and I said, "No, a cycle does not look like that." Well, what does a cycle look like? That is what a cycle looks like. You see the blue line there? That is in fact what a cycle in the financial markets looks like. Why? Because of the basic concepts that I have just explained to you about Hurst's cyclic theory. Here you will see 2 cycles that have combined. And so each cycle, here's a green one and a pink one, when they're combined, these follow the rules. They have harmonic ratios, which are simple integer values, in fact 2-to-1. The pink cycle has a wavelength which is twice as long as the green cycle. They have synchronized troughs. Notice that the troughs of the green and pink cycle are synchronized where possible. Of course, here, the trough of this green cycle is not synchronized with the trough of the pink cycle because at that point, the pink cycle is experiencing a peak. That is why in financial markets, how do I go back on here? That's why in financial markets, cycles do not look like this, because when the pink cycle is experiencing a peak, what is happening in price? A trough. Okay, price here is the combination of 2 cycles. Remember the first basic concept in Hurst's cyclic theory, price movement is influenced by multiple cycles. Here we have only 2. So when we combine 2, according to the mathematics that Hurst proposed, when the pink cycle is experiencing a peak, price movement that results is experiencing a trough. That's one of the reasons why many people really struggle with Hurst's cyclic theory when they first come to it. Because when they believe there should be a peak of a cycle, what is happening in price? A trough is happening in price. And people find it really confusing. A peak should be happening. Let's say we're trading